Quick announcement before we start.
Mike insists we say this every time.
Because it matters.
If you enjoyed the show, guys, subscribe to the Montclair Pod on YouTube. It is right below the screen.
It helps more of your neighbors find the show.
And it helps us keep doing this every single week.
Now on with the show.
So just right out of the gate, I remember having to pack him up out of his home. I couldn't necessarily have him move in with me at the time because we had stairs and other issues. So just being able to try to figure that all out right out of the gate was really, really difficult. And then just when we realized just the continual medical needs, we realized that we're at a place where this is going to be catastrophic for us, that this is something that, required me to be able to stop some of the savings for my own retirement and other things that we realized are now just going to have a huge problem, especially as I'm a father of an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old as well. So I'm part of that sandwich generation that's getting squeezed.
Welcome back to the Montclair Pod. I'm Mike.
And I'm Farnoosh. And that voice you heard at the top of the show was Senator Andrew Kim talking about his personal experience as the father of 2 young boys and the son of a parent who needs a lot of support.
Yeah, this episode is all about aging, whether you're the one getting older, and aren't we all, or you're caring for someone getting older, or in the sandwich generation, meaning you're responsible for young kids and aging parents at the same time.
Because it can be a lot of stress, certainly, but also significant dollars spent. So in addition to the senator, we're also speaking to an attorney who specializes in elder care planning, Laurie Hauptman. She's going to teach us about what we can do to prepare for these eventualities. And later in the show, we'll meet a psychotherapist, Maris Pasquale Doran, who helps people navigate these issues and also maintain a sense of well-being and presence.
Basically, how to deal with this stuff and not completely lose it. I mean, losing it a little is probably unavoidable, so you got to have a little self-love, a little self-compassion, and all of that. But finally, we're going to speak to the president of Aging in Montclair, an organization right here in town that supports seniors, because for many people, this can be a very isolated and lonely time. Fortunately, there are resources.
Yes, this is a big show, packed episode, and we really, I think, only scratched the surface. So we promise this is going to be a topic we're going to come back to from time to time on the pod. But before we dive in, I would like to take a minute and do an informal poll of the audience. Now, I ask you, dear audience, how many of you are okay with the unsolicited phone call?
Here we go. Okay, this is my fault. Apologies to everyone.
Thanks for the apology. And yes, it is your fault. I'm sorry, but I need to have everybody understand, especially you, Michael, that there's an effect that you have on people when you just call them out of the blue on their cell phones.
I'm learning, yes. Or should I say...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please, by all means, Farnoosh, just interrupt me. Because I think that's the theme, right? We're talking about being interrupted, right? So go ahead and interrupt me.
Well, I was just going to interject and say, is it possible that you're only hearing about this for the first time from me? No one in your life has ever stopped you and said, hey, you know what? Maybe don't call people at dinner time on their cell phone.
No, that's not what this is about. This is, you made the point of saying, you can't just call people.
Right.
That's what you said. You can't just call people.
You can't. And this is because you do it a lot, actually. You're like, I'm just going to call him and sort it out. Someone sends you an email and you're like, you know what? I'm just going to call him. And I'm like, the kid is 24 years old. He's going to have a heart attack. And he will be talking about this with his therapist. You just call him out of the blue because it's generational. I think I'm on the cusp. Like, I think it's fine if you want to call me unannounced. It's totally fine.
I don't feel fine about it anymore.
But I'm just telling you, like, if you're calling someone and they're millennial and down and they get a call and they're not expecting it and they see your name, they're going to go to the dark place and think something is wrong.
They're going to think I'm mad at them or something's wrong.
Or worse. Yeah. And look, audience, keep me honest. If I'm wrong about this, if Mike is 100% correct with his kamikaze phone calling, let us know in our DMs.
I'm reluctant to use that term snowflake, but oh my God, really?
No, it's not about, it's about an etiquette that has evolved over time and keeping up with the times. Some of us do it.
Yeah, I hear that, but I'm also just like, there are so few ways to directly communicate with people. The reason why I like calling people is because you can't really empathize with somebody when you're just reading a text. You're not getting those tonal cues and all of that stuff to know that it's not a big deal.
Have you heard of an emoji? I'm kidding.
And it's hard enough already when you don't have the visual cues. You know, I do FaceTime you sometimes on it.
Oh yeah, that's always a kicker when it's a video call coming in. No, I think it's fine if you want to speak to someone on the phone. Obviously, this isn't about you should never speak to somebody voice to voice. It's more about giving people the heads up. So if you really do want to connect with somebody, I mean, things are nuanced these days. So it certainly helps to talk on the phone. And frankly, it could be a quicker phone call than a text chain.
Totally.
But just give them a heads up, like, hey, are you free?
I got to text first and be like, hey, can I give you a quick buzz? But isn't that scarier?
No, then you got to say, everything's fine. All is good. Just have a quick question I want to run past you. At which point I'd say, can it just be a text?
Yeah.
I also will do this with some girlfriends. We will do voice memos. We love a good voice memo, that way.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That way you can catch them when they're ready and free to listen and you don't have to sync up on a time to talk. It's just, hey, I was thinking, and then you can just go on and ramble. That's another way to do it. Welcome to the 21st century, Mike.
Thanks so much. Tell the truth. Do you permanently have me on Do Not Disturb? Like, is it just me?
I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can do that. Although I would love to find out if you can.
Great.
I'm going to be looking into that. All right. Are we good? Are we still friends?
Now? Oh, I hope so. I was the one that I was worried I alienated you and, could be the end of the Montclair pod because I just call you too much without warning. Do you call your parents out of the blue?
Sure. I think, again, it's generational. I think the boomers and the Gen Xers, by and large, are not going to be afraid to get a phone call. But again, if it's a family member, if it's a close friend, sure. But I told my husband last night, I said, imagine your sister just calls you. What's your first thought? He's like, yeah, I might wonder if there's something wrong because they have more of a text relationship. It depends on your relationship. And that is our TED Talk.
Speaking of your parents, do you think they'll ever move back east?
No. We've tried.
Because your brother's on the East Coast too, right?
Yeah, my parents are on the West Coast in Northern California, and they moved there about 25 years ago. I had already finished college. I was fully raised on the East Coast, and my brother was raised partially on the East Coast and then partially on the West Coast. Now he lives in Boston. My parents love the West Coast. They love the weather. They love their friends. And while it makes logistical sense to some degree to have them be closer to us, and frankly, I wouldn't mind the occasional childcare, as my brother says, they would be miserable. And they've told us that. They said, no, we would, like, what would we do? It would just be like starting over again. And I don't think that's fair to them.
Yeah. Although I would get unlimited Todd Deek.
You would get unlimited Persian food. 100%. But that would be a problem for your waistline and your health. So I'm not sure we'd all be paying more for health care at that point, which is our next conversation with Senator Andy Kim. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about it. And especially as they're getting older, it's been top of mind because, the question is, when that phone call happens, we have to obviously go out there and it is what it is. It's just one of those things. We're not going to be the first or last family that's separated by thousands of miles. It's going to have to include this into their care plan, I suppose.
Yeah, because you don't get to choose these things. And that's a theme we're going to be returning to again and again today is like everybody thinks that they know they get to pick how they're going to spend either the later years of their lives or caring for their parents or what have you. There's no amount of planning that you can do that can dictate exactly how it's going to go, but you can do certain things to minimize the disruption potentially. And I've definitely learned that the hard way.
So we wanted to start this episode with a personal story. Mike, you are willing to share your relationship with your dad as he has aged, and you have stepped in as really the primary caregiver in some ways, or at least not caregiver, but the one who is sort of managing his care and his estate. And you've been dealing with this, living with this for 10 years. So I give you the floor.
Yeah. So about 10 years ago, my dad, who we lovingly refer to as the grand dude, was at his office. He was a lawyer and he fainted or passed out. We don't know exactly what happened, but he hit the back of his head on a hard floor. like a marble floor near the elevators in his office. And that caused a really massive brain bleed. And so he needed what's called a craniotomy, where they cut out a significant portion of your skull. Like when I first heard about things like this, I thought they like drilled a little hole and let it like breathe. I don't know. I didn't know what it was, but they cut out a portion of his skull that was like the size of your hand, like a third of the top of his head. And they put the skin back and they let it swell. And over time, the swelling goes down and they can put the skull back on. And during this period where he didn't have a skull and it stays off for like weeks, sometimes months, he had to go to a rehab hospital and he was still altered. He would try and get up and walk and he had to wear a helmet anytime he was out of bed. You know, it was really dangerous. And so, but he would try and get up. And I'd had multiple conversations when he was admitted to this place. You got to watch him. You got to put bed alarms on, make sure he doesn't get up, because the last thing you want is for him to fall again because he's got no skull on part of his head.
God.
And sadly, he fell twice, actually. The first time he broke his nose when he tried to get up by himself. Then he fell a second time, same kind of fall as the very first one, and he hit his head again, but this time with no skull. And it caused a second massive traumatic brain injury that made it like he couldn't breathe on his own then. He couldn't eat on his own. He had to get like a trach breathing tube put in. He had to get a peg put in, which is a feeding tube. And he was in an ICU for about a month, I think. And he was essentially like what anybody would think is comatose. Like he was not responsive. He couldn't talk. He couldn't do anything. And before that, he was altered. He had balance issues. He had cognitive issues, but he was him. But for this period after that second fall, he was completely out of it. And so we had like really tough decisions to make. We had hard conversations with the doctors at this ICU as to whether or not to keep him on life support because he was not breathing on his own. But there was one thing that he could do, like, and this is what like swayed everything. So when we were kids, we would always play thumb war. Like one, two, three, four. I declare thumb war. He could still play thumb war. Like aggressively play thumb war and like almost beat me despite the fact that he was basically unconscious. And the doctor was like, you know, if it weren't for the thumb war, I would say like, this is not looking good. But the fact that he can still do thumb war means like he's still in there. And I asked him, I was like, could he have a meaningful recovery? And he thought he could. That was his guess. No guarantees, obviously. So me and my sister were put in the impossible situation of having to make this decision. I should also note that my sister lives in England. I live in New Jersey, obviously. And when this first started, like I had literally gotten off a plane from California for work. I landed at Newark and I got this call. I didn't even go home. And I immediately jumped on another plane and I was there in the emergency room before he got taken in for surgery. That's what began the odyssey that would take another 6 months or so. So after he was in the ICU for a while, he ended up having to get shipped to New Jersey because I wasn't going to be able to continue to take care of him. I had a lot of miles at the time, so I was just using miles to like jump back and forth. And my sister came over a couple times from England, but it was an impossible situation to deal with. And my dad didn't really leave much in the way of instructions for us. Like, here's what you got to do. He had a law practice. We had to wind everything down. We had to sell his house. We had to find all sorts of stuff, paperwork, and we had to figure it out by the seat of our pants. And it easy to do all of that while also like, you know, he was going from hospital to hospital. So we moved him up here. He was in a special hospital just to get him weaned off a ventilator. It's called an LTAC. It's a long-term acute care hospital. And these are hospitals where people go just to get weaned off ventilators or where they need essentially the kind of care that you get in an ICU, but you're not necessarily in a critical situation anymore. So he was there. He was in various other hospitals, and he was getting like pneumonia every once in a while. So he would have to get admitted to like Newark or Hackensack. I think he was in like 10 hospitals over the course of this period. And every time he would go to a new hospital, I had to be there to explain to the doctors the full history, because there's another issue in this country that a lot of people don't talk about, which is continuity of care can be very challenging because there's no really systematic institutional memory. Yes, they get your files get handed off from one place to the next, but often it's different systems. And so you got to just be there to explain to them. Because if you're not, bad stuff can happen. Even when you're there, bad stuff can happen. But it's much more likely if you're not there for the intake to explain, here's exactly what happened. It recently was transferred from one place to another, and they got the meds completely wrong. And despite the fact that we warned them about it and told them, it's really a problem. So in any case, long story bearable, this has been something that we've been dealing with, and it really has been a full family effort, with my wife picking up a ton of the responsibility because I work full time and she does part-time stuff. And so she is able to go to doctor's appointments. My sister helps with paperwork stuff and financial stuff from England. And she comes here at least twice a year to help in any way she can. But yeah, all of this went down and it completely took over our lives in a way that none of us could have predicted. And I can tell you that the level of care he requires now probably wouldn't have been necessary were it not for that second fall. Maybe he could have gone back to work with just the first fall. We don't know. We can never know. But certainly after the second fall, his care costs it's so expensive. And this is something we talked to Senator Kim about because his dad has Alzheimer's and requires special memory care places. Memory care units are $15,000 a month in New Jersey. And they go up 3 or 4% every year because of inflation. You can get a locked in price if you pay a little bit more when you go in at some places, but it's unbelievably expensive. My dad now lives in an independent living place with a live-in aide who is the greatest lady on the planet, who is Gladys. Shout out to Gladys, who has the patience of a saint and is really a member of our family now. And we asked my dad if when he woke up, if he wanted to live with us, because maybe we could figure out a way to get a different house. Our house would not accommodate him. He was like, no. He was like, I don't want to live with you guys. And I think he didn't want to be a burden.
Well, I'll just say it because you'll never say this. You'll never say this, but your dad is very lucky to have you and your sister, really, and Vanessa and Gladys, and to have this team, right? Think about the folks who are aging alone.
Yeah.
Right? Which is what we'll talk about later in the show as well. But
totally.
I want to praise you a bit and your family and all the experts that you've brought into this, that you're also bringing onto the show too. We're going to talk to some of the people that have helped you and your family navigate. Well, let's move on now to our conversation with Senator Andy Kim. We're going to talk about what would you do if caring for a parent meant putting your own financial future and your kids' financial future on hold. And that's not a hypothetical. It's the reality that's facing a lot of families, including right here in Montclair. And it's something that the senator knows firsthand as a father of 2 young kids and as a son navigating his own dad's Alzheimer's diagnosis squarely in the middle of what's often called the sandwich generation. It's a deeply personal and wide-ranging conversation about aging, caregiving, and the financial strain that comes with all of it. Take a listen. Senator Andy Kim, welcome to the Montclair Pod.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Before we get into policy, let's start with your own personal experience. When your father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, how quickly did the financial realities of caregiving hit you and your family?
Well, it actually started before even the diagnosis. I mean, this originally started because my father had a big fall and was no longer able to walk, and that's also when we realized that there was all this cognitive decline that he's been experiencing. So just right out of the gate, I remember having to pack him up out of his home. I couldn't necessarily have him move in with me at the time because we had stairs and other issues. So just being able to try to figure that all out right out of the gate was really, really difficult. And then just when we realized just the continual medical needs, we realized that we're at a place when this is going to be catastrophic for us, that this is something that, required me to be able to, stop some of the savings for my own retirement and other things that we realize are now just going to have a huge problem, especially as I'm a father of an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old as well. So I'm part of that sandwich generation that's getting squeezed. And I find that my responsibilities as a father of two boys and my responsibility as a son of my dad, sometimes they feel in competition with one another. And I feel, really challenged when I have to, be able to, skimp on, I have had to, cut off, for instance, saving for my kids' college funds as I'm trying to deal with my father. And that makes me feel like, I'm just not delivering for my kids. Those are some of the problems that we're now seeing just compounding, and it's just getting worse and worse.
I don't think people realize just how expensive elder care can be. Like, I've had my own experience, which we're talking about a little bit on this show, but it can be tens of thousands of dollars a month, depending on the level of care that they need. And I guess, we don't really have a safety net apart from Medicaid, which covers some of this stuff, and Medicare, I suppose, in different ways. But can you talk a little bit about what can be done from a policy level to help people that are in this situation?
Yeah, look, this is something where I remember, a neighbor of mine back home, I saw her, she had a for sale sign in front of her home a couple years ago. And I went up to her and I said, "What's going on? Like, I see a for sale sign." She just started crying because she was like, "This was supposed to be our forever home, but my husband has dementia now, and we can't afford this." I feel really terrible because I didn't understand at the time fully. But I do now. I do understand now just how devastating and crippling this can be. I mean, the average cost for a private room at an elder care center in New Jersey is about over $14,000 a month. That is outrageous. I mean, who can afford this? You need to be like a billionaire to be able to care for all of this. And everyone that I talked to that's gone through this situation of dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia, Parkinson's, I think everyone kind of goes through this episode of thinking, I thought Medicare covered this, and it's just like everyone always kind of thinks, oh, this will be something that we can do through Medicare. No, you really can't, for a lot of it. And that's where the costs really start to add up here. This is something I am trying to address. I raised this in a big speech that I gave last year in front of my colleagues in the Senate. I talked openly, publicly for the first time about my father's problems and challenges when it comes to Alzheimer's. But I use it as an opportunity, hopefully, to challenge us to try to come up with a fix to this, because Alzheimer's doesn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. These challenges of long-term care, at-home care, even if you're trying to have care at home and need a caregiver, there's a 3-year wait. 700,000 Americans are on a wait list right now to try to be able to get support at home through Medicaid. Huge problems that we're facing. This is something that I'm really making a big part of my life's work, here in the Senate, to try to address these needs and try to come up with a fix for this type of catastrophic financial situation that so many face. 7 million people have Alzheimer's right now. We expect in 20, 25 years that number could go up to about 13 to 14 million Americans. So, this is a huge problem, and I'm trying to come up with fixes to hopefully be able to address it through Medicare and make this much more accessible to many, many Americans that need this help.
Are you finding that there's an appetite for that level of spending? I mean, we have baby boomers coming of age into this that are going to need this kind of help in numbers probably we've never seen before. It's going to cost billions and billions of dollars, right? So how are you finding the reception to this?
Well, first of all, I think I found a very strong positive reaction from my colleagues to me sharing my story about my father. And I think that's where it always needs to center, is recognizing this is about real people here, and that every single one of us has some story of care needs within our families. And at a time of just hyper-partisanship, of deep division, I truly believe that these moments, these very human moments of vulnerability and concern about our loved ones, like what is more pervasively human than these experiences we have of raising kids in a family and watching our loved ones get sick and need care. Like, those are things that I hope everyone can connect to in some way or another. So that has been really meaningful at a time of great division, to have so many colleagues on both sides of the aisle come up to me after that speech and ask me, what can we do to help? Like, what can we work on together? And so I'm exploring that. Like, for me, recently, I'm working with Republican Senator Susan Collins and others on trying to supercharge medical research, for instance, at a time some of that's been brought into question in terms of how much we should spend. The tragic story is in some ways that my father actually was a medical researcher who tried to cure cancer and Alzheimer's, and then now no longer remembers that that's what he did with his life because Alzheimer's has erased from his memory his life's work at trying to cure Alzheimer's. So
He was a geneticist, right?
Yeah, that's right. He was a geneticist at a lab in South Jersey at the Coriell Institute for Medical Research. And that's what brought us to New Jersey when I was 3 or 4 years old. So, this is important. When it comes to the long-term care, the at-home care, look, it is challenging, but I think the main thing I want people to take away is we're already paying for this one way or another. People having to basically bankrupt themselves to be able to be eligible for Medicaid, and now we're seeing the resources come out through that. And by that point, they are often much more progressed in their illness and their challenges and have a lot more needs at that time. Finding ways to perhaps be able to help people do at-home care, especially if that's what's preferred by the patient, by the person, those can often be less expensive, can be things that, we can actually support while not having so much of it come back to us. All these other challenges that we're seeing, they are things that we're paying for as a society, and we're getting to be at a point in the future where, a couple years down the road, like I said, I often think of this, Gretzky skate to where the puck is going. And 10, 20 years from now, we're at a point where nearly a quarter of every dollar spent on Medicare is going to go to try to address some needs from somebody who has Alzheimer's. We're already at a point where this is crippling, so much of our healthcare. So I think it's important that we address it. Otherwise, it's going to be something that is going to come around and bite us no matter what. So let's try to do it in a strategic way. Let's try to address like early interventions, for instance. I was, as I've dove into this more, realized that, by the time someone like my father is exhibiting symptoms, they could very well have been progressing along Alzheimer's for 10 to 20 years. So our ability to do early detection, try to find, potential therapies and treatments earlier, these are the types of things that can help us be able to manage this. But the problem is we don't have a national strategy on addressing Alzheimer's. We have national, at a time when we have so many other challenges, this is such a big problem that affects so many. We're not going to be able to have the impact that we need if we're just reacting to things day to day. We need a real goal, a real objective, a real focused strategy. And that's what I'm trying to bring to our country, is give a national strategy on how we work together to be able to address Alzheimer's.
Senator Kim, one of the issues that comes up on a lot is long-term care insurance. For many years was considered sort of a wonderful resource if you can afford it in the later stages of life to come to your rescue, essentially, if you needed it to support you financially as you aged. But increasingly, people are finding that it's the premiums keep going up, and sometimes the insurance companies are not coming through with it. It's becoming less and less accessible. What are you finding as far as that, and how we can make long-term care insurance, that industry, more affordable? Because for many years, that was sort of the alternative to, affording this. And I don't know if that's even a possibility anymore for people.
Yeah, I mean, like the market for long-term care insurance has really shrunk dramatically, and number of providers of that insurance have dwindled significantly. It's something that we're looking at in terms of just all the different tools that we have at our disposal. But I think part of the problem is the costs have gone up so significantly, as we've seen in so many other aspects of healthcare, right? But this is one of the aspects of healthcare that's risen in terms of costs the most dramatically. As a result, it really has limited the impact that long-term care insurance can do. Yes, the premiums have gone up because the costs have gone up, but also in terms of what you get back from it, it's been difficult. That is something that we're looking at and trying to figure out, what are all the different tools that we can use. There's no silver bullet to this, but we're trying to line up, hopefully a series of options and tools that people can engage in. And also it's about just getting people to be thinking further ahead. I say this as someone like, the fact that my father has Alzheimer's makes me probably have a higher predisposition to having this when I get older. So I am thinking about this personally too, in terms of what I was saying of early detection and, other things that we need to be thinking about. So I think for me, when I look back on it, I feel bad sometimes. I was like, maybe I should have saw that this was coming. I was telling you, I was cleaning up my father's, apartment after a lot of this decline was happening. And I found this kind of diary of his, a notebook of his where he would take notes. And you could just read like day after day, you could just see his handwriting disintegrating. Like, you could see that it just was really turning into scribbles. And I look back on that with a lot of heartbreak. Like I should have known, maybe if I had, just kind of woken myself up to the reality of what was happening and moved past my busy days, that maybe we could have, done something earlier. But that's what everyone always feels, right? The point is regardless of when you find out, what tools do you have? How do you have the help you need? Because when we got that diagnosis and the doctor told us, this was going to be hell for us for a couple of years, there wasn't really a lot of other follow-up to help us think through what next. No one really helping shepherd and guide us through that, both financially as well as medically. And those are the types of things I think a lot of Americans could use help on. There's no reason for people to have to experience that alone. And of course, it's going to be difficult, as you all were expressing in your own ways, but it doesn't have to be this hard, something that I hear from everybody.
You don't get to choose. It's, what you were saying about thinking about yourself. So many people think that they're, for whatever reason, going to get to choose how things end up for them, because we all idealize it, but there's one thing I've learned. It's that you don't get to choose these things. If you could, I guess, wave a magic wand and make any specific changes to Medicare or Medicaid, is there something that is glaring for you in terms of these federal programs that could be updated?
Yeah, well, look, like I said, I really do think that the at-home care, for instance, is really a no-brainer to find a way to be able to do that, because it's something that most people want if they have the ability to age at home and be able to do that. And it's so much, it's so much cheaper as well than having someone have to go to, some type of home. And I think that that's something that I'd love to be able to see, but we're trying to push forward and really try to create a national dialogue about this. So I don't necessarily want to prejudge and say that I found the solution, because many people have been deep in the trenches on this far longer than I have. And I just spoke today to a broader caregiving summit, people who are been working on this. And hopefully we can try to come up with real fixes. I think a real fix to Medicare is going to be hopefully the option that can have the widest reach, because of just how applicable it is across all of our seniors, rather than necessarily thinking about this just through Medicaid, which is the primary tool. I mean, Medicaid, just every single state does it different. There's so many different eligibility requirements and other issues. Yes, there are things that we can tighten up and fix there, but to have the kind of scale and scope that I hope we have, we are really looking at what it is we can do to lift up Medicare to be able to do this in a way that hopefully can reach as many people as possible that need help.
In New Jersey, there's a caregiver tax rebate or tax credit, I suppose. Can you explain a little bit how that works?
What we have right now is just a lot of issues, especially with families that are providing caregiving, and just the challenges that they're facing. So for instance, so many of our family caregivers, this is affecting their ability to work. This is affecting their ability to be able to provide and make their own salaries. It's affecting their careers. So we're just trying to find a lot of different tools to be able to provide some support and for ease, whether that's at the state level through different tax credits that are out there. And at the federal level, that's again something that we're trying to push forward on. What can be able to help them be able to do this in a way that isn't going to, again, cripple them financially, while still be able to provide, their loved one with the kind of care that they want. So, those are the types of things. And I think, New Jersey has been forward leaning on, these different types of tools that are there to be able to help people. So I'm proud of that. There are things that we're doing in New Jersey that I wish we were seeing, all over the country. But it still is room for us to grow, especially because New Jersey, we got a high cost of living, challenges. So as I was saying, for me to try to find a memory care unit in New Jersey, especially for my father, where, he's losing his faculty of speaking English as he's as his mind is deteriorating and he's reverting back to Korean only. Like there are specific needs that I need to find in a caregiver. And challenges is that like we're really struggling when it comes to workforce. It's not a lucrative job to be a caregiver. So to be able to find someone, it's hard work too. It's really physical and demanding and emotional. So we're at a real deficit when it comes to having the workforce that we need. And so just a lot of different things like that are just squeezing so many families in New Jersey and around the country. But because of the high costs in New Jersey in particular, it just makes everything all the more difficult.
For our listeners who are sandwiched and they're supporting their children and their aging parents, what is one thing that you want to share with them? An important lesson, perhaps a conversation they should be having with their families right now to, as best they can, get ahead of things?
Yeah, look, when I look back on it, I wished we as a family had a conversation about, just who's in a position to look after. My sister and I had to do a lot of scrambling to try to figure out who can be there for different elements, financial or in person and whatnot. I wish we, had some foresight because, she's got a little baby. I got 2 boys. Like it's just a lot for us. And, just a little bit of planning ahead of time for us to have conversations with my parents. Like, for instance, it was incredibly difficult just to understand my dad's like financial status and like, just like be able to figure out like once he started declining, like to be able to figure out how I can get power of attorney or this or that to be able to help navigate. I wish we had done some of that ahead of time. I wish we had done something just in the case that something were to happen that we have some of these documents ready to go that can be activated. Doing all this scrambling, literally just trying to figure this out was difficult. Navigating, understanding what is covered through Medicare and current insurance that your parents have and what isn't. That's important because when I was, in the thick of it and trying to figure out, I told you not just the cognitive decline, but the physical decline of my father, he had to go to subacute rehab. And out that Medicare Advantage wasn't going to actually give him the fullness of the recovery that he needed. So, while he's in the subacute rehab place, I had to navigate switching him to traditional Medicare. I wish I knew that stuff, right? Like, I wish I knew these things. So, like, it's not a whole lot, but just some of that initial talk, even just knowing the support that you're willing to do. How much can I chip in? How much can my sister chip in? Things like that. It's so much better to do ahead of time, even if it's a little bit of it, just an initial conversations, rather than when you're so emotional and you're in the throes of it and you've gotten very little sleep and you're feeling the pressure because they're about to kick your dad out of a rehab place in a couple of days and you have to figure out, where to get them to. Those are the types of things where I felt like it just made things so much worse.
It's the worst. It can be so.
Just the communication, right? Like I feel like, just kind of having that communication, knowing full well that just better prepare you because it just didn't have to be the shock that it was, for my family. A good elder care attorney can help just to walk you through all the things that you didn't know. One final question. When you were talking before about the compassion your colleagues in the Senate had for you, I couldn't help but think like a lot of them maybe couldn't relate just because there's so much wealth in the Senate. And I know that's an important part of your work is money in politics, corruption and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that may or may not relate to this specifically, but some of the work you're doing in that area? Yeah, I mean, just writ large, there's so much distrust in politics right now. In our home state, 84% of people in New Jersey believe that their elected officials are corrupt, and they're not entirely wrong. I mean, there's so many problems out there when it comes to corruption or just special interests or lobbying and just the amount of money it takes to run for office. You can see why people feel like politics is just so detached, right? You wonder this idea, like, do the people in Congress even feel it? Like during a shutdown, the idea that members of Congress and the president continue to get paid while all these federal workers don't, like, that's just disgusting, to me. Or the idea that members of Congress can trade stocks, including in companies that have business before their committees. Like, what world does that make any sense when we're making decisions and passing bills that have huge impacts on the financial gains or losses of industries and companies? And this idea that just like politicians are playing with other people's chips. They don't really feel it themselves. So, I understand that. And I'm not going to call out any particular of my colleagues, but just writ large, I think the American people want people representing them that understand what they're going through and be able to engage and empathize. And even if they are wealthy, to make sure that they are going out and meeting people, doing town halls, engaging. But so often, like, members of Congress in particular are seen as very inaccessible. Like, I'm one of the very few members of Congress that does regular in-person town halls, opportunities for anyone to come. And I do that in particular to try to fight back against just so much of this distrust that is out there, where people, again, just don't feel like, I guess the way I'll say it is that a lot of people just feel like politics is just some exclusive club for the well-off and the well-connected. So I feel very strongly about pushing corporate PAC money. I don't trade individual stocks. I am fighting to be able to get big money out of politics. I think the Citizens United decision was a disaster for our politics by allowing so many, billionaires and corporations to dominate our airwaves. And, I think just every American hopefully can just agree, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, we just need to get this big money out of our politics that is complicating things. We don't even know what to trust and believe anymore because of all the TV ads and everything that's out there. And so that's what I'm trying to push for. I'm a public school kid, a son of immigrants that somehow has found my way to being, United States Senator representing my home state of 9.5 million people. Like, that's a deeply humbling experience. Like, I get to work a job whose job description is in the Constitution of the United States. Like, how incredible is that? I should never think about how to use this job to benefit me personally, how to profit off of it. That I should never be thinking about this for anything other than, what I can do for the people. And that's what the people deserve. But unfortunately, that's not what they've always gotten.
Do you ever make it to Montclair, Senator?
Yeah, I have. I really love it. I'm a South Jersey kid, so I've done a lot of exploring across the state, and I have to say, I really love it in Montclair and elsewhere. These are just incredible communities, and it's been really wonderful to be able to get to know people and hear all of the things that are going on in their area.
Well, next time you come up, let us know. We'd love to show you around.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, was hoping to be able to come up for the Montclair Film Festival, but
Definitely.
unfortunately was stuck down. But regardless of that, I'm around as a lot. So just look forward to finding some time to be able to do that.
Senator Kim, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks to Senator Kim for joining us to talk about such an important topic. It wasn't lost on me, and not even him, that he's a U.S. Senator, right? Talk about someone who is well-connected, well-resourced, knowledgeable, has the power to change laws, right?
Yeah.
And he is having such a difficult time with this. He even admitted I think he pretty much said he's like delaying some of the other financial goals that he has hoped to pursue.
He had to pull back on saving for college, for his kids, for his own retirement. I feel like this issue is something that a lot of us aren't prepared for on a personal level. If suddenly you're faced with potentially tens of thousands of dollars in medical expenses every month, even in a wealthy area like this. I mean, can you imagine just having to come up with that? But also at the societal level, because we've got a lot of baby boomers that are coming of age now that are requiring more help. And it's government money through Medicare and Medicaid potentially, but also how do we because it can ultimately impact our ability to care for ourselves in 30 years.
Exactly.
Right? Like that's really a big problem.
And the irony is that, the boomers, you could argue, and there's data to support this, like they've skirted a lot of the disasters that like the millennials are facing. Like the student loan debt crisis is not really a boomer problem, right? It's a millennial and Gen Y and Gen X problem for the most part. Talk about recessions, right? Like poor millennials, right? They've been through so many rounds of economic downturn.
I know.
The boomers bought their homes low, they sold them high, or they're hanging on to them. And now the financial burden is probably going to fall on their kids that are still saddled with all that other stuff. Yeah, it's a whole other episode. But we're going to hear now from two experts whose job it is to prepare us for these eventualities. Right, Mike?
Yep. One is from a financial perspective, and one is from a personal mental health perspective. We'll hear from Maris Pasquale Doran, a psychotherapist who specializes in these issues, and she'll talk to us about all of that.
First, though, we're going to hear from Laurie Hauptman. She's an attorney focusing on elder law and estate planning, who, Mike, you met when you were trying to figure out your dad's situation.
Yeah, I met Hauptman because she's also an expert in VA pension rules, and my dad is a veteran who's in Vietnam, which entitles him to some benefits from the government, and we had to figure out how to navigate all of that, along with making sure we had everything set up properly for him and his care in general. She really is an expert in the sandwich generation. She actually gives talks all over North Jersey about these issues, and now she's going to take us through some of the things that you can do to prepare for what could be coming. Here's our conversation.
I've been an estate planning lawyer and elder law attorney for about 36 years, and I know all the lawyer jokes that have been sent my way. But as an estate planning lawyer, I don't divorce anyone. I don't sue anyone. I don't bankrupt anyone. All I do is help people plan. Longevity means longer caregiving years. Children are staying dependent longer. So many young adults need help well into their 20s due to the high cost of living and a difficult job market. And people are having children later. The pressure of caring for family members can strain marriages, friendships, relationships with siblings. Conflicts arise in a marriage when one set of parents have financial resources to pay for caregiving and your wife or your husband's parents do not. How do we balance working, like I'm still working full-time and I have a father that's 94 in full-time care. So workers are balancing two full-time responsibilities, employment and sometimes unpaid caregiving.
Yeah.
2/3 of the sandwich generation caregivers say they struggle to balance work and caregiving. And many caregivers, particularly women, must turn down career opportunities or reduce the work hours, impacting their long-term financial independence. So very interesting that this is some of the stuff that we are seeing with this sandwich generation. But lack of communication can lead to misunderstandings which lead to conflict and concerns about cost, inheritance, or how care expenses are divided can lead to all these family conflicts. So this kind of segues into how do you deal with this? Do you deal with it head on? You want to talk about planning. It involves the counsel of professional advisors, not just lawyers, by the way, financial advisors, life insurance advisors, brokers, accountants.
So let's get into the nitty gritty. What are the documents that are most important to estate planning?
What are the documents, what I consider the sort of the foundation of estate planning? And those documents are a general durable power of attorney, which is one that handles finances, and I'll go into a little bit more. A durable healthcare power of attorney and living will, a last will and testament. And then we can see that trusts are utilized, either revocable or irrevocable, depending upon what planning we are doing. Important to kind of address is the powers of attorney. People don't realize it's actually, Mike, one of the most important documents that you need because everybody focuses on the will. The will is a document that indicates how you want your assets to pass upon your passing. okay, upon your death. The financial power of attorney deals with how to handle your assets and financial decision-making while you're alive. And the reality is that we don't all pass away immediately upon a medical event. You could have a stroke. You could have a heart attack. Years ago, you died from those and you didn't come back. But now you live, but you live sometimes in a medically needy state. And so a lot of people think that a will is so important. And it is, and it does dictate important strategies and where you want your money to go and who is the executor or executrix. But the power of attorney is while you're alive. And without one, if you don't have a power of attorney, do you know what the process is then for someone to make decisions for you?
Yeah, you got to get a court order, right?
You got to go to court to get a guardianship.
Yeah.
So instead of having a document, which is not really cost prohibitive, that states that Mike can do financial decision-making for Jane, and that can handle stuff, you now have to have Mike go to court and get appointed. And the problem is that is expensive. The average guardianship is about $5,000 to $6,000 in paying the attorney that represents the proposed guardians. And you have the court then appoints an attorney to represent the alleged incapacitated person. And then the worst part is that even when you get deemed appointed by the court, you have reporting requirements. You have to report to court every year on the financial status of the incapacitated person. You have to report the well-being with a doctor's report every year to the court. Even husbands and wives, everyone, have this requirement.
And this is forever, right?
Yeah, yes.
Every year?
Indefinite until they die. And then if you end up having a house or even a secondary home and you want to sell that, you have to ask court permission because they have to step into the protective mode of the incapacitated person. And so if you don't want the court involved in your private life and in your private finances, you need this document called a general durable power of attorney. And everyone over the age of 18, Mike, should have one. Now, there is a healthcare proxy. Okay. The healthcare proxy does allow someone to step forward to make medical decisions, speak to doctors, access medical records when you are no longer able to. That is an important role because if you don't write it down and you have children that are conflicted in decisions, or you have a blended family and stepchildren come out, you're not necessarily going to be able to make that decision unless you write it down and say, I want Mike to be my healthcare proxy. The other component of the healthcare power of attorney is the living will or the advance directive. And that document is a way of you speaking and telling your loved one whether or not, if there's no reasonable hope of recovery or regaining a quality of life, do you want to be kept alive on advanced life measures? A lot of people talk about is the pull the plug, so to speak, clauses. Yeah. It's not just pulling the plug, but the reason why it's so important to have that is it's so much easier to follow your wishes, everyone that's listening, than your loved ones having to figure out what you would want. That's the beauty of having it written down. An advance directive is such a powerful way of empowering your children to know what you would want if you were able to communicate it. Okay?
Yeah.
Please have the talk with your parents or your siblings. One way to start the conversation is to discuss an article you read if you don't know how to broach the topic about the cost of care or the need to plan, and then segue to that. Hey, I read about this. Do you want to talk about it? Also, if there's been a recent diagnosis or hospitalization, use this time to discuss long-term care planning. Use it as a springboard to say, hey, we weren't expecting this. You know, we all thought everything was humming along, but can we talk about it? You don't want your loved one to feel they're losing control. You want to explain to them, Mike, that they're gaining control. By having a say right now when they can talk, they're gaining control. If you wait too long, you lose that control. And again, we go back to that word of the day, and that is plan.
That's Laurie Hauptman. Thank you so much for sharing the knowledge. You can find her at Hauptman Law. That's HAUPTMANLAW.com, where they've got tons of free resources and articles. She's based in Livingston, but we won't hold that against her.
So now let's talk about preparing the mind and the body for all of this, because going through this stuff is stressful. Having these conversations with parents can be very challenging because you can feel lost at times, like dead-ended even. This is a non-starter for some older parents and with their adult children, right? For some help, we are turning now to Maris Pasquale Doran, who's a psychotherapist based in Summit. Also, not going to hold that against her.
Yeah, she actually reached out to us when she heard us talking about this on an earlier episode, and she wanted to share some of her experiences she's had relating to all of this, both in her practice and in her personal life. So let's start there.
I've been a psychotherapist for a number of years, and I myself went through a personal experience being in this sandwich generation and now in the sort of post phase and managing grief, et cetera, while showing up as a parent. My own father was diagnosed and sick with pancreatic cancer back in 2019 diagnosis, and he died March of 2020. And so that experience, I attribute a lot of my ability to be very kind of present or to be who I wanted to be in that role very much to my mindful practice, meditation. Some of the nervous system regulation was so necessary, and it was still a constant fight or flight. There's so much to that area that I have taken now into my practice to really help support clients in that area, both during the actual time period of illness and aging, because it's not just an illness, of course, right? Everybody's aging, and really looking at much more macro, what that brings up for us in terms of our family of origin stuff, for lack of a better word, as well as our own parenting at home, often very close to launching kids, the very multi-level layers of grief that come up in midlife as a baseline, and that very kind of existential place where is really the rich work that I love as well of, we really looking at more, what is the legacy we are now leaving as we're watching our parent decline and pass? In my situation, my father was diagnosed very quickly. I mean, it's hours that you're trying to make huge decisions. What facility, surgery, not surgery, chemo first, second, what to do. I mean, we were like hamsters on a wheel with legal pads like Cancer Co. I'm lucky. I'm one of 4 siblings. And my mom is still alive, very competent people. And my dad at that time in life was also involved in his own care at that point, right? And these 6 high-functioning, intelligent people, significant jobs and very successful in all their realms, were trying to just suddenly get a PhD in oncology overnight. I mean, it's not possible.
It's so true. I remember every time my dad got moved to a new hospital, there was so much pressure on me to be there for the intake, as I said before, mainly so I could be sure to explain to these doctors what his history was because of these continuity of care issues. They're a real weak point in our system. And I remember one time I was giving my dad's history to a new doctor, and he was like, "Are you a neurologist?" And I was like, "Aw,
thank you.
Shucks. I'm not. I just had to learn this stuff to make sure you people understand it and communicate it effectively. And I always hope it gets socialized to the broader care team because they work 12-hour shifts. That was a whole other thing. I was like, who's the nurse? Who's the attending? Who's the next nurse? And who's the next attending?
And then the nurses change, overnight. Yeah, for sure. That's so stressful.
It was. We actually talked to Pasquale Doran about how to deal with that level of stress. And this is an important part of the conversation. Listen to this.
I want to also highlight that a lot of people think about mindfulness being meditation, and meditation is a mindful practice, but mindfulness isn't meditation. I believe in meditation deeply, privately, personally. I think it helped me get through that phase of my life. Absolutely, no questions. And mindfulness is really being in the moment. So we can do it in the shower. You can do it in ways that you're doing these things anyway. You're always going to eat dinner. Can you do it a little bit more mindfully? Can you walk to the bathroom a little more mindfully, right? Can we get off the phone?
That means basically for people who struggle with this, because it's kind of hard to think about. It's hard to really reckon with if you've never done it before, but it's basically as simple as just think about what you're doing and the experience of what you're actually doing, right? Like, how does the water in the shower feel hitting me right now? How does it feel brushing my teeth? And it can be for
Exactly.
30 seconds, right? Like and just doing that kind of triggers a different part of your nervous system. Is that right?
And it's training us to be aware. So
Yeah.
we are grooving patterns now in our brain that is really teaching us, let's be aware of what in the world is going on for me right now. What are my inputs? I mean, how often have I gone to my basement and then been like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Why did I come down here? I have no idea. Or you wake up in the morning and suddenly you're like brushing your teeth. It's like, wow, what happened from A to B? But I'm here now. Right.
Yeah.
And to actually be aware of the moments that are happening, that's what's going to help. Before, when we were talking about that responsiveness rather than being reactive,
Yeah.
because you're training, right? So yes, for example, for a parent, a mother who has a teenager who's, by the way, their hormones are also going wild. The mother herself is in perimenopause with hormones that are going wild. We have all this chaos happening internally, enormous stress over launching children, enormous stress over an aging or sick parent. And then we get in the shower. That can be a really beautiful self-care moment. Just because you're alone, it's nice and warm, maybe something smells good, period. That's great. And that's enough. And if you can actually pay attention to each of the senses, let me take one extra moment to really smell my soap, to feel it lather, to feel the shower, right? Some people, it's like, why? I don't have time to take an extra few minutes. Guess what? Don't then. Just be where you are, because that training, that neural pathway, those neurons that fire together, wire together, right, are going to be that storyline in there of what you do for yourself is going to help you show up more present when your teenager is horrible to you, when your parent has the crisis, when your spouse doesn't feel empathetic, so that you can use those skills and respond rather than react. You're still going to have the emotion, right? You're still going to be mad, angry, stressed, all of that. And to respond rather than react is going to help those guilt cycles.
You have to be so intentional, though, about these moments. And then imagine you're an adult daughter and you have aging parents and you see them a handful of times a year, if that, to have now a different level of connection with them, conversations that are kind of heavy, and depending on your relationship and your relationship with money and all that, can get really sticky, to say, hey, what's your estate plan? Or, hey, if something should happen to mom or dad, what's the plan?
And we're like a super communicative, emotive family. Like, certainly in our kind of nuclear family here, we do a lot of sharing and caring, but not every family's like that. And even for us, it's freaking hard. And so for those families that don't talk about feelings that much, it can be really, really hard to go here.
It's a delicate topic for sure. And Pasquale Doran has some advice on that front too. Take a listen.
You cannot force someone to do something that they're not ready for. And most of us stop quickly, right? Well, they don't want to. And that's that. And that's that for a long time. I mean, there's people that's that for years. I don't really know what the plan is. I asked that one time at that one Thanksgiving and they were like really closed off. So there's going to have to potentially be a persistence to it. It's also the framing of it. People usually believe that it's too soon until it's too late. So anyone that's listening, having these conversations and normalizing aging and death. Our culture doesn't. This is a, quote, dark conversation. This is, quote, morbid. It can be, I believe, so deeply in this reframe of let's make this empowering. When this is actually happening to the parent, it is devastating enough. Let us just sit in those really hard feelings rather than the goose chase of what did they want? Where are the things? Where's the paperwork? Being able to approach a parent, if indeed anyone listening has a parent who is healthy or mostly healthy at this point, this is the only guarantee we all know in humankind, right? This is where we're all headed. We don't know much. Nobody knows how their life is going to evolve, but it's definitively going to end. That's it. And so the more often we can have these conversations, even now with our own children, of this is what I want. This is my belief system. This can be actually a beautiful thing. This is how I believe our relationship can exist when I'm not here anymore in this form. There's a great book called Being Mortal, Atul Gawande. When I was teaching the healthcare system, it was almost a joke because it was a fall semester course always. And these were second-year students getting their master's in social work. And so many of them would bring it to Thanksgiving or Christmas at the end of the semester. They were like, I'm like presenting my parents with this book. But guess what? It's an awkward conversation. No matter what your relationship is like, that can be really paralyzing to not know how to begin, right?
Yeah.
And so to have a tool like that can be helpful. Hey, I had a friend who went through this and they recommended this book.
I would also add another book. I loved all the tools that she recommended. There's also a great book that came out last fall called My Mother's Money by Beth Pinsker. Beth is a CFP. She's also a longtime financial journalist. The book is part memoir, part how-to on how to first have these conversations with your aging parents, but also important tactical things like power of attorney and estate planning and working, through all of the the doctor stuff and the care stuff. And that book is called My Mother's Money. And by the way, Beth Pinsker, she talked about how her mother was on top of her finances. Her mother worked her whole life. She had a will. She was very buttoned up. And yet there were a lot of things they learned the hard way in the moments when her life started to decline and her health started to decline, that Beth had to step in and was really just trying to get that power of attorney. Oh my God, what a nightmare. So important to have these tools, because the reality is in that moment, it is so difficult. You've got the emotional stuff that you're dealing with, which is plenty, on top of now having to go and search for these things and learn about things for the first time.
Yeah. And sometimes you're dealing with whatever the situation is that's stressing you out, and you're all knotted up, and it's not pleasant to experience, certainly, that kind of stress and anxiety and depression sometimes, but it's also not pleasant to be around, whether it's a loved one or a healthcare professional, someone just trying to help you out, and you're like a raw nerve. How do you regulate your nervous system? We spoke to Doran about that too.
To be responsive and not reactive, no matter what. You're talking to the nurse. You want to pull your hair out and swear at them. You're speaking to your wife about something that may seem, simple or in a moment. We are carrying so much angst and weight and anxiety and stress. Our most loved individual will often be the recipient. And if we can learn to have some level of regulation through just a breath work, or if you can step outside, do the 60 seconds of jumping jacks, a few push-ups, cold water on your face, an ice cold
activity,
shower.
right?
All of that is truly just neuroscience-based regulating in terms of the systems it's turning on and the systems it's cooling down. You're going to still be mad. You're going to still be stressed. Nobody has the magic wand to get rid of the situation or get rid of the emotional response, but to be able to be responsive to something rather than reactive can help us then communicate better. And it removes that cycle that most of us get in of that shame guilt spiral.
I get that.
And then that takes over. I'm a big proponent of medication when it's necessary. I don't prescribe. I'm not an MD. Absolutely get a consult. The comparison I often use is if you have a knee injury, you're likely going to go to physical therapy and you will wear a brace. You will wear that brace until you are strong enough in your PT to take the brace off and do PT alone. Medication can often be one tool to help manage while the world is on fire and while you're implementing all the other systems.
Well, thanks so much to Maris Pasquale Doran for taking the time to speak with us about all of these issues. You can learn more about her work at marispasqualedoran.com. We will put that link in our show notes.
Yeah. And you know what? Actually, she also has a children's book out called Piper Chen Sings, which she wrote with her sister-in-law, Philippa Sue.
I know Philippa Sue.
She played Eliza
Yes.
in the original Hamilton cast. Isn't that cool?
That's amazing.
Yeah. Do you think that they make her sing that would be enough at every Thanksgiving dinner? It's kind of a great Thanksgiving song, actually.
I remember when she came to the Watchung Booksellers to read that book. I wasn't able to go, but I remember reading about it. I thought that was so cool. Eliza.
What's the best song? What's your favorite Philippa Sue song on Hamilton, you think?
Oh gosh. Don't quiz me on Hamilton stuff. I saw it obviously on Broadway once. It's all I could afford.
Seriously.
After many rounds of casts
once.
changing.
We did not get to see the original.
No.
But I think it's Helpless. Her song, she did that song, Helpless. Bum, bum, ba-dun. It's got that groove to it.
Bob, hit it. Well, our final guest today is going to share another facet of this story that often goes undiscussed. We've talked a lot about this sandwich generation from the perspective of those in the middle, you and I. But what about for our parents and aging loved ones?
For a lot of people later in life, especially those who don't have families that take responsibility for caring for them and protecting them, getting older can be scary and lonely. But here in Montclair, there are tons of resources for seniors, and one of them is a group called Aging in Montclair.
That's right. It's a nonprofit that supports residents over 60, but what that actually looks like day to day is a lot more layered than you might think. We sat down with President Lynda Hollander to talk about who they serve, what aging in Montclair is really like right now, and what's missing.
All the people in Aging in Montclair are over 60 years old. Many of them have been lifelong residents of Montclair. And yes, they did come to Montclair for the school system, for the environment. They've seen a lot of changes. Some of them say for the better, and some of them say for not the better, meaning that they find Montclair to be a lot more crowded now. Parking is a big concern for the seniors, because they need to park close to stores and restaurants, and they find themselves having to park in these parking decks and do a lot of walking. So that is one change that they're not happy about. But a lot of them have stayed in Montclair. They've downsized, meaning that they've sold their house where they raised their families and now have moved to apartments, whether it be senior apartments or in the Church Street area, where there are a lot of apartments where older adults live that do not drive anymore, and they're able to walk everywhere. And they really like that sense of community.
That detail about parking might sound small, but it's actually a window into something bigger. Aging in Montclair isn't just about programming, it's about how livable this town is as your needs change. And for many residents, that also means making tough financial and lifestyle decisions.
Most of their kids do not live in the community any longer. They've spread out. So they find themselves here and needing to sell their house. And we deal with a lot of folks in Aging in Montclair who are downsizing and looking for apartments in Montclair. From my understanding, and you'd have to check, there is rent control for older adults in the town of Montclair. So that seems to work well for them. And again, many of them who are living much older, into their 80s and 90s, have given up their cars. So there's no more gasoline to buy and no more car insurance, and they're able to walk. There is a program, Easy Ride, which the seniors can take. There's also an Uber program now in Montclair, which allows seniors to have 10 round-trip rides free of charge within the Montclair area.
So there are supports in place, but Hollander says the biggest issue that they're seeing isn't housing or even cost. It's something less visible and a lot harder to solve.
They're lonely. They're isolated. One person said to me in a group, "I don't see anybody else except for the people in this group." Aging in Montclair gives people a purpose. It has them looking forward to going to programs and actually making that human connection.
That idea of purpose comes up a lot because once your kids are grown, once you're no longer working, your built-in community can disappear faster than you expect. So Aging in Montclair is trying to rebuild that intentionally, not as a service, but as a network.
I'm also a facilitator of groups in the community called Aging Conversations. And every week we meet at the Montclair Public Library, and I have two groups of 10 people, and we have a third group as well. And we talk about some of these things. And one group has been meeting for 4 years now. And these were people who didn't know each other and now who are friends. And building community, I think, is really an important thing. And community doesn't have to be your family. So the traditional family idea of the older generations was, your mother, your father, and your children and your grandparents. But we try to broaden their horizons and say family could be whatever you want it to be. And building a support system and making connections is really a very important thing. One woman just said yesterday during my group that the group gave her the courage to meet with her estranged cousin, first cousin, that she hasn't spoken to in 30 years. And it was a real process for her to come to terms with her past and all the issues that her family dealt with. And yesterday she said she opened the door and saw his face as a little boy, and now they're both in their 80s. So those are the heartwarming stories that you get from belonging to an organization like Aging in Montclair and building a support system and community.
And that's the kind of outcome you can't really measure. At the same time, Hollander tells us that there are still gaps in how Montclair supports its older residents. The nonprofit is really pushing for a senior center. We've talked about that on the show before. It's come up quite a bit on the town council in recent months, and it will be expensive, but clearly there's demand.
Thanks again to Lynda Hollander and everyone at Aging in Montclair for their work and what they're doing in the community. And if you or someone you love could use support, Montclair actually has a number of helpful resources to know about. The Township's Senior Services Department offers classes, events, and support programs focused on health, wellness, education, and social connection. You can also check out the Lifelong Montclair Directory of Senior Services, which is a comprehensive guide to local resources, transportation, and more.
There's also the Montclair Institute for Lifelong Learning. It's known as the Mill, at partnersfdn.org. That offers high-level classes and opportunities for connection for adults 55 and older across Montclair and Essex County. And at the Montclair Public Library, the Senior Space is another great hub. They host weekly resource support, including access to social workers and free Medicare counseling through the State Health Insurance Assistance Program. Go to montclairlibrary.org, or you can call them 973-744 0500, extension 2235. And last, for caregivers, the Essex County Division of Senior Services offers a respite care program, and that includes short-term home care, adult day services, and emergency support. Their phone number is 973-395-8384. We'll repeat all of that in our show notes.
All right, let's get into the news. First, the referendum. The results are now official. Montclair voters have approved question 1 of the school referendum and rejected question 2, setting up the next phase of decision-making for the district.
In a statement following the final certification, Montclair Public Schools acknowledged that the outcome reflects both support and concern from the community. The approval of question 1 is going to spark a one-time tax raise to cover past debt to the tune of over $12 million. But the failure of question 2 means we're not raising taxes permanently to address the structural deficit, and that's going to leave a gap of millions of dollars in the current budget as well as next year's.
Superintendent Ruth B. Turner said the district will now work with the Board of Education to assess the financial implications and determine next steps for the 2025-2026 school year. In a press release, she said, quote, "The final results of this referendum reflect both the engagement and the priorities of our community. We are grateful for the approval of question 1, which provides critical short-term support, and we hear clearly the concerns expressed through the outcome of question 2.
District leadership says the next phase is going to involve a detailed financial review and planning process with updates expected as those decisions take shape.
Next, Montclair officials delayed a tax deal for the Lackawanna Plaza redevelopment yet again. This seems to be tied to the school crisis, in fact, because there's talk of some portion of the pilot money, which typically just goes to the town, being redirected to the schools too.
That's right. And if you recall, Dave Plasek, who's the developer over at Lackawanna, told us that he had no problem if some of that pilot money went to the schools, but it is not his call. Looks like he'll have to wait a bit longer for that final financial agreement to get done, which essentially would be the green light to go and do the redevelopment.
And apparently there was a bit of a meltdown at the last BOE meeting last week. Ilmar Vanderer from Tap Into Montclair had a good story late last week about that. It seems like he wasn't overstating the case.
No. Last Wednesday evening, the Montclair Board of Education, as we recall, voted unanimously to close Renaissance Middle School. Parents, teachers, and students packed the atrium at Montclair High before the vote to make their voices heard. And when the board cast their ballots, board members reportedly broke down in tears.
Yeah, here's some quotes from that night. One teacher said, quote, "What kind of education do you think your children will receive when the staff have nothing left to give?" Another said, "This week, my students have asked if I know where they're going to school next year and if I will be going with them. My heart breaks."
So, as we reported last week, Renaissance is going to be repurposed as a pre-K school beginning in the fall. And the superintendent says that's going to be a savings of roughly $2.3 million. The board also outlined about $6 million in broader budget cuts for the 2026-2027 fiscal year. Wren families have until April 17th to select a new middle school, Buzz Aldrin or Glenfield. Notifications go out May 1st. Full coverage of that board meeting at Tap Into Montclair.
Finally, we have a date for Porch Fest 2026. It's going to be on May 16th, and there will be bands playing on porches all over town. I did that last year, and I'm going to do it again this year. And I think we're going to do it the same place we did last year because I think they invited us back, and they cooked some amazing food. Like the guy was making giant prime rib roasts on like his pellet smoker and slicing people like prime rib sandwiches.
I came to that and I must have left too soon.
It was up on the deck and you had to know. But people who knew, they knew.
Can I
it was so
make
good.
a suggestion for this year's Porch Fest? If you're going to attend a band playing and you're going to sit there the whole time and bring your lawn chair, like bring a food, bring something, bring a beverage, like make it a potluck. Don't make it the host's responsibility to like
That's a good
feed
idea.
everybody. Make it a picnic for your family if you want, but like also sharing is caring.
I think like that guy's,
I don't think
it was an exception.
Yeah.
I don't think that everybody was doing that, but it was awesome.
That's awesome. Definitely going back to that one, right? Chip in maybe. Like I would love to host, but I don't have a porch per se. I do have a backyard. And that's the thing. Like porch is just like kind of doesn't have to be a porch. It can be a backyard. It could be a driveway.
We weren't on a porch. We were in a backyard. There was a tent. I would also advise anybody who's hosting, have a tent.
Oh, they provided that?
They had a tent up, and not just in case it rains, but because it can get really hot under the direct sun. So yeah, put up some covering, folks.
All right, one big thing.
Next week is spring break. A lot of people will be away. We're going to do a greatest hits episode, though, aren't we,
Yes, we are. We're going to do a compilation of some of our most exciting, impactful segments, packages, field packages. So we're going to be revisiting the magnet system, our whole deep dive into the history of our magnet schools. We're going to be revisiting our conversation with the founder of Genuine Grow, who is starting his own cannabis farm, essentially, here in Montclair.
Yeah, we went and visited it. You can actually buy their products now in stores. So it's a timely rerun, I will say.
And some other bonus stuff we're not going to tell you about, but be sure you are hitting that subscribe button and you don't miss out on our weekly drops every Thursday.
Yeah. We also have another date scheduled for our next installment.
Yes.
Of
Supper with the Super. And I think this time we're going to focus on a single topic as well. We're going to take questions from the audience. So we'll have our topic that we want to talk about, but we also want to open this up to the community. Keep it clean and kind, everybody. You can send us your questions, hello@montclairpod.com. You can also DM us on Instagram and let it be known what you'd like for her to address, and we'll make a good, honest attempt.
Yep. All right. Until next time, we'll see you in town.
See you in town.
Please leave a message and I'll call you back.
I'm so sorry for calling without permission. I was just driving in my car and I thought I'd try, but now I feel horrible about myself. I made a huge mistake. I've broken a rule. And apologies. Bye.